Striker-fired pistols didn't catch on because they were good. They caught on because they were cheap. Fewer parts, less machining, throw in a low-rent frame made from sleazy Section 8 polymer. Now you can slang that shit for 30% less and make a 70% margin. And while that formula made Gaston Glock a billionaire, it made triggers suck. Let's be honest, the squishy, half-cocked feel of a Glock trigger is truly the best of no worlds. But you know what? It's good enough. And good enough is exactly what we've come to expect from modern mass-produced striker-fired pistols. Until now. And that brings us to the subject of today's discussion, the CZ P-10C.
It was a smoking gun. 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 It was a smoking gun.
Alright folks, P-10C, and as you may know from watching my other videos, I'm more of a fan of hammer-fired, double-action, single-action kind of guns, but I find the P-10 very interesting because I feel it really does embrace Glock's fundamental formula for just a pragmatic, everyday, mass-market pistol. And I don't think CZ made any illusions when they launched the P-10 back in 2017 what their intent was. It was really designed to do Glock things in a Glock way at a Glock price point. But it was designed to do it better. And I think that comes through in every aspect of how the P-10 handles, how it shoots, how it feels, and they've just dialed everything up in a way that just makes the entire experience more intuitive, more communicative, and just better, I think. And I guess I'm kind of giving away the punchline here. I think the P-10 succeeds in that endeavor, but I think it's interesting to look back at how we got from here to here, and you know, looking at how much the gun industry struggled to beat Glock. I'm not a huge fan of Glocks. This 17 shoots okay for me. It's fine, but never been a huge fan of the way Glocks feel and the way they shoot. But it's hard to argue with the sledgehammer that Glock dropped on the handgun industry, and just they changed everything, and it was a disruptive innovation that the industry struggled to compete with for 30 years. Like the intro suggests, I mean, these guns with the polymer frame and the simpler striker-fired mechanics were just so much cheaper to produce, and the margins were just huge, and they were able to sell these things to law enforcement for a song, and you know, they just made piles of money. And you know, Gaston Glock, when he died, was very, very wealthy. I mean, he was a billionaire. I don't know how he compares to like Elon Musk and Bezos and all them. I don't think he was quite on that level, but rich dude. You know, if you go back to the 90s, I think everybody's instinct, you know, everybody meaning gun companies, I think their instinct was to try to beat Glock on price. And looking back, starting in the 90s, you start to see these kind of cheap, everyday, everyman duty pistols coming onto the scene. You know, the Smith & Wesson Sigma series, which was really a pretty sketchy pistol, and Smith & Wesson actually was sued, I think, by Glock because the Sigma was so similar to the Glock. I think there were some patent infringement lawsuits. Some other examples of guns, like in the vein of the Smith & Wesson Sigma series, you had Colt's 2000 All-American. You had the FN49 series, which again, polymer frame, really crummy double action trigger, and those eventually, the 49 eventually led to the modern FM pistols that we have today. And I think a lot of people forget that CZ actually had their own just kind of ghetto-ass striker-fired pistol, double-action only pistol, back in the 90s, and that was the CZ100. Like a lot of those other pistols I mentioned, it just kind of traded quality and shootability for, affordability and simplicity. And like all those other pistols, it just didn't really sell because people just don't want a horrible trigger and a low quality pistol. They want a good quality pistol for a good price that at least has a mediocre trigger. And, for most people, a Glock trigger, while it is squishy and kind of spongy, it's easier to shoot than like a real double action only trigger. And Glock offered this at a price point that everyone could live with. Their marketing was brilliant. Their sell-in strategy to law enforcement was brilliant. And Glock was hugely successful. If you can't beat Glock on price, what are you left with? I gotta think CZ kind of did the math on that. And okay, how can we beat Glock? Shootability. Shootability is kind of the one factor that maybe Glock struggles with more than some other aspects, and certainly Glocks are reliable, certainly they're durable, and they're well made. So if you can offer those things at parity, but offer a more shootable experience, maybe you can win. So after offering some less expensive polymer framed hammer fired guns, including the P-07, and they also offered polymer frame versions of some of their metal frame guns, the Rami P and the Phantom, the SP-01 Phantom. They really got down to work on creating a revolutionary new striker-fired platform. They called that the P-10 because it came after the P-09. And so it was just kind of sequential in the numbering scheme. And, if you want a little more context on the work that went into designing the P-10 platform, check out James Reeves' interview with one of the project leads on the P-10 project. The guy's name is Dalibor Krupika, and he talks about, not only how much work they put into the P-10 to make it reliable, but to make it shootable. He talks about like some of the torture testing and some of the mechanical aspects that they put into it, the ergonomics and everything, a lot of which you'd expect. But I think the P-10C, in this case, really speaks for itself. When you get this thing in your hands and start shooting it, it's immediately apparent just what CZ was able to achieve with this pistol, and it is a phenomenal pistol at the range. So CZ is known in the realm of handguns for just creating very ergonomic, really nice feeling pistols. And I think anyone who's handled a CZ75 variant gets that. I mean, those guns just feel great. They feel very natural in the hand. I think they take some cues from the Browning High Power as far as the ergonomics, which is one of my favorite pistols from an ergonomic standpoint. They take more mechanical cues from the P-210. But I think CZ was able to take some of that ergonomic DNA that they have always had with the CZ75 and kind of morph that into a modern polymer frame striker-fired pistol. And while the P-10 doesn't necessarily feel like a CZ75, it still has that X factor in terms of just how good it feels. And you know, looking at the grip, I think the first thing you notice is the contour, and I'll roll in some pictures. But it's subtle. It's not, you know, huge bulging palm swells and stuff like that. But it's enough to just feel very natural in the hand, and the contour on the back strap has enough of a curvature to just kind of naturally fill your palm. It feels really good. And that creates stability against the back of your hand, but it doesn't go so far as to push your hand away from the trigger, so it makes the trigger reach kind of a challenge. And I've got very short fingers, very small hands, and I can reach the trigger just fine with the P-10. So really positions the hand well in terms of the trigger orientation and stabilizes your strong hand. And then when this subtle curvature on the side, it's enough to give your support hand better purchase. And I find a little bit goes a long way in that regard. Guns that just have completely straight, flat sides, I always feel like they're missing something to me. But when you put your support hand on this, it creates instant lateral stability, and you know, you've got this excellent relationship between your strong hand and your trigger finger, and that just all works very, very well. The shape of the grip kind of fills your hand in such a way that it allows you to separate the motion of your trigger finger from the rest of your hand. And it just allows you to focus on your trigger pull and shoot really, really well. And the whole thing, the angle and the contours work to just kind of gently guide your hand up under this overhang, which creates extra stability and tension and just kind of locks the whole thing in. And it's very cohesive, and when you shoot this thing, you can almost just hear the CZ engineers in the boardroom talking about how to make this thing more ergonomic, and they really did an excellent job with how this gun feels. And in a way, this gun is to striker-fired pistols what the Browning High Power is to hammer-fired pistols. It's just kind of that ergonomic watershed in this category of pistols, and I think other striker-fired pistols should study the P-10 to emulate its excellent ergonomics. The other thing that you hear a lot about with the P-10 is the trigger, and I'll be the first to tell you it's a really good trigger, and it's very shootable. That said, this is one of those cases of it is what it is, and it is still a half-cocked, partially cocked striker-fired trigger. And again, that's kind of the standard that Glock set back in the day, and it follows that pattern. It does feel like a partially cocked striker-fired trigger. There's no escaping that. You definitely get the sense that's what it is. And it has certain aspects of that type of trigger that are less good than just like a normal hammer-fired trigger. But I think what CZ accomplished with this type of trigger is commendable, because they worked around just kind of the shortcomings of that style of action to make something that's really good and really shootable and everything it needs to be for you to shoot great. Is it a 1911 trigger? No. Can it compete with like a Walther PDP, PBQ, or VP9? Not really, because those are fully cocked, single action striker fired systems. This again is a partially cocked, so it's not really going to compete with those. But again, CZ really works some magic with this trigger to make it nice, to make it shootable, even though it is, from a mechanical standpoint, it is that half-cocked type of trigger that a Glock trigger is. It has some slack, it has some take-up, and then you come to a very firm wall. It's firmer than, you know, what you get with a Glock. There's it's a little more wishy-washy, a little more squish, but it's a very tidy wall on the P-10C. And there's if you really focus, there's a little creep, but it's hard to perceive. It's like it does creep because the striker has to compress a little more because it is, again, partially cocked, but CZ was able to minimize it, I think. So you feel a wall, and then it just kind of goes into a really crisp, really satisfying break. And you know, you have to pull this trigger to just get how crisp it is. And it has whatever part of your brain just really likes bubble wrap and slap bracelets and, you know, biting into a fresh Cheeto. I mean, that's kind of the effect it has. It's just very satisfying, more satisfying than what you get on a Glock. And the other thing, and in that interview that James Reeves does with the project lead from CZ, he talks about the fact that the P-10 uses a dual-sided trigger bar. And, you know, the original CZ75 used a dual-sided trigger bar. The 1911 uses a dual-sided trigger bar. And I find that guns that do have a dual-sided trigger bar, as opposed to a single-sided trigger bar, which is what you find on a Glock and like a Beretta 92 and most other guns, modern guns, it just imparts pressure more evenly from the trigger shoe to the fire control parts. And it makes the trigger pull just a little more balanced, a little more predictable. And I think it's subtle, but it lends to a better shooting experience. And that is definitely the case with this. It's just a very even-keeled, very, very smooth, very measured trigger pull. And it shoots great. And like I said, it's not a 1911 trigger. But again, CZ did everything they needed to do to make it shootable, and that's what matters, and it still feels really good to shoot. So, you know, with the right expectations, you're not going to be disappointed in this trigger. It's a really good trigger for a factory gun. And honestly, I had a P-07 for a while, and that is a hammer-fired gun, and it uses the Omega system, which is uses a single-sided trigger bar. It's a simplified version of CZ's classic trigger action. And I liked this better, you know, just objectively. And not to say the P-07 didn't shoot well, it was accurate, it was fine, but to me this was just a better feeling gun.
Another thing I really like about the P-10C is its recoil impulse, and it's got a pretty low bore axis like a lot of striker-fire pistols do, so it's got that kind of low-slung, linear, kind of straight-back recoil impulse. But what's cool about it is that it has almost this bounce to it. There's a certain buoyancy to the way it feels, and you feel the recoil, but it's not punishing, it's not, you know, punchy or percussive or unpleasant. The recoil seems to just flow, and it helps you get into a rhythm. I feel like the P-10 turns the recoil into kind of an asset as opposed to anything that's negative or anything that is prohibitive to effective shooting.
So in terms of size and role, I think with the P-10C, everybody knows that CZ was really going right at the Glock 19 to create a Glock 19 competitor and the Glock killer, you know, as we so often see on the internet when we're talking about Glock's competitors. And it's about the same size as a Glock 19, and people ascribe this certain magic to the Glock 19's form factor in it being, like, you know, big enough to feel like a legit service pistol, but still, you know, compact enough to carry just about everywhere you need to carry it. And it does kind of fit that form factor, though it is just slightly bigger than a Glock 19 in most respects. It's just a little bit longer, we're talking tenths of an inch here, you know, probably not enough to make a big difference in terms of the carrying experience. And, you know, the grip's just a little bit higher. I have my 17 here. It's a little bit kind of in between a 17 and a 19, and you can see that it's you know, notably shorter than a 17, and it's, you know, the grip is, especially when you put the mag on, it's shorter than a Glock 17. So, and one selling point of the P-10C from the get-go was the fact that it could fit Glock holsters, and I don't have any specialized Glock holsters because I don't really carry Glocks, so I can't tell you for sure, but if you read on the internet, you can get a sense of it fits in some, it doesn't fit in all of them. So there is that. There's a good chance if you get a Glock 19 holster, it's going to work with this, or maybe with some minor adjustments, it'll fit your Glock 19 holster. So as far as reliability, I've put around 500 rounds through this thing. I haven't had any issues at all, and that's not surprising. Reading forums and YouTube reviews and whatnot on the P-10C, any of the P-10 guns, I can't remember seeing anything that said they weren't reliable. I mean, these guns run, they're very reliable, and again, if you watch that interview that James Reeves does with the gentleman from CZ, he talks about, you know, I think it had to run 50,000 rounds without a failure or something like that, and like, yeah, they're really reliable. Now, that said, there were initially, early on in the P-10C's life cycle, there were some questions about the firing pin safety, and I think there were some instances where it wasn't working. And I've read that they have rectified that since then. But other than that, I've never read anything to suggest the P-10 platform in general is anything but reliable. The Czech military uses the P-10F, which is the full-size version, like the Glock 17 version of the P-10 platform. So that should tell you something. In the 500 rounds I've put to this, I've never cleaned it. I didn't even clean it when I bought it. I threw some lube on it, obviously, and just took it to the range, and I've been shooting it. And, you know, there was a couple months between one range trip and the next. And I did put a little extra lube on the rails, but, I mean, the thing just runs. I put, you know, 124 grain, 115 grain. I put some really shitty remanufactured ammo through it, and it ran that. So it's a really good, you know, military grade, duty grade pistol that's very reliable and very shootable. So as far as things I'm just not crazy about with the P-10, you know, I guess it's more of a wish for. Like, well, the trigger is very good. There's nothing about the trigger that can't be described as good. You know, I think just the magic that CZ was able to achieve in terms of the ergonomics really begs for a trigger that's a bit more capable. And I think about how well this gun would shoot if you were to pair it with a trigger like you find on a PDP, which feels more like a single action trigger because it is a single action trigger. I think about my Walther Q4 SF. You know, the PPQ and PDP style triggers are really nice, really shootable. And then to have that steel frame, it would be cool if CZ could like expand the line to offer some more specialized boutique versions like that. I think that would be really neat. But granted, because those guns don't offer, because they are single action only guns and they don't offer safeties, they're not really carry guns for me. So this to me is a more realistic carry option because it is, if you're not going to have a manual safety, this is a more realistic carry option because it is that partially cocked striker system, which I think is just makes more sense from an everyday carry, and it does give you the capability to put a striker control device on the back. And there is a company, I'll post the name in the video of the company, that does offer a striker control device for the P-10 platform like you see in Glocks. So I think, again, from a practical standpoint, it's great the way it is, but it would be cool to see something just a little more specialized in terms of the trigger feel and everything. Also, the grip texture. The grip texture on the back strap and front strap is very sharp, very aggressive. The texture on the sides is just kind of, you know, very mild. And as I've said before, making gun plastic sharp and aggressive just offers very little extra benefit in traction at the expense of comfort. And it's one of those things where grabbing it just kind of hurt right out of the box. I really didn't like it, so I put this skateboard tape over the front strap, back strap, problem solved. Creates much more tension, or much more traction than the sharp plastic nubs, and it doesn't hurt as much, so I wish gun companies would just kind of come to the realization that you're not going to create a really positive traction out of gun plastic. It's just not going to work. We're always going to put grip tape on it. Either give us the ability to put G10 panels on these guns or just make the texture not as sharp. All right, folks. In conclusion, I think the CZ P-10 is amazing because it really it really delivers on its intended goal, and that is to create a more shootable alternative to Glock. And I think they really achieved that. And, you know, I guess I pick on Glock a lot, and I don't want to tell you that the Glock is a bad gun. You know, certainly it's not. Its track record speaks for itself. It's very reliable. It's very durable. And, you know, honestly, Glocks are accurate. They're plenty accurate. It's not that they're inaccurate compared to other guns. I just think they're a little bit more challenging to shoot than many other platforms. And I think, you know, they're often recommended to people as a first gun, or from people who just maybe don't know as much about the other guns that are out there. I think the P-10 gives you something that most people are going to find more shootable and more intuitive and just more natural to shoot. And CZ essentially built a better mousetrap, and I think they need to have credit for that. And I really like the P-10. It's, you know, I wouldn't not carry it. It's not my first choice for carry. Again, I prefer double action, single action. But if you are looking for just kind of a mid-sized do-all striker-fired gun, I can't think of a better option than this. And I don't see why you would pick a Glock 19 over this. I mean, I guess you can make the argument that there's a lot more aftermarket stuff for Glock 19s. True, but again, you're basically rebuilding the gun to get, I think, anywhere close to this in terms of its just inherent shootability. So if you're looking for a gun like this, definitely check out the P-10 line. I think you'll love it, and I am very impressed by it, and it's a really nice, high-quality gun that shoots very well, and it won't break the bank, and you will not be disappointed in a P-10. So thank you so much for watching. I am Matt with Hipster Tactical, and I will catch you later.